Hello, everyone. We're back the top of the hour talking about Project 2025, a one-on-one with Kenyette Barnes. I mean, this lady right here is something else. We're going to break this Project 2025 down for you to give you a little bit more understanding. And this is for people, this is for everybody. But I am especially focused on my brown people, but this gonna hit everybody, not just the brown. It's gonna hit everybody. Thank you for being my guest today. You wanna give me a little background of your history?
Sure. I'm Kenyette Tisha Barnes. She, her pronouns. I guess I'll start by saying I'm a mom. I'm a mom of three amazing humans and who are in various stages of their lives. I am on the cusp of being an empty nester, so that's really exciting. And it gives me a little bit more time to do more on the ground work. I'm a political strategist. I'm a federal registered lobbyist. I've held registered lobbying credentials in 3 states. And I am an organizer. I'm an agitator. And I'm here to really dive into what this mandate really is. And I think it's important to have this conversation.
Thank you, Ms. Barnes. Let me ask you. Let's get into it. Let's talk about the Department of Interior.
Yes.
We
So the
going
department.
we're not going to go in order. We're just going to skip around, but we're going to try to hit everything that's important that need to be discussed. Let's go.
So the Department of the Interior, if you think about what is the Department of the Interior, it really is what is happening on the ground in our national borders. So that is our national parks, our national rivers and lakes and streams. It is how and it works very closely with the Department of I'm sorry, the Environmental Protection Agency. So it works very closely with the Environmental Protection Agency. And one of the things that is really obvious in reading the Department of the Interior mandate for Project 2025 is that they are really attempting to chip away at some of those tribal protections. And that's going to that's going to be very important for our Native and our First Nation brothers and sisters, because one of the things that has really helped to preserve wildlife, preserve the land in those, and primarily in the continental West, is state and EPA mandates against drilling, against fracking. And now we're seeing with Project 2025, there is a concerted attempt to defund BLM. So let me tell you what BLM is. Okay, BLM is the Bureau of Land Management. Okay, and that's one of the reasons why I want to start here, is because someone reached out to me and said, I was reading this Interior and they're talking about Black Lives Matter, and can you talk about this? Like, no, it is the Bureau of Land Management. And so basically these are the people who are responsible for our waterways, our wildlife, natural resources, including fracking and drilling. As you know, we are heavily petroleum dependent in the United States. We just are, from everything from our lip glosses to gasoline. And petroleum is a very lucrative and heavily traded commodity. And there are people who align to a more conservative agenda who don't want that regulated, despite the fact that there is a ton of ecological research to suggest that fracking and hyper drilling is probably not good for our environment. And it definitely seeps into our waterways. It impacts the community. It impacts fisheries. It impacts the ecosystem of our natural parks. It is looked at, unfortunately, as another way to hyper-regulate free market. And so what has happened with this particular mandate is that even, yes, the Bureau of Land Management is in this mandate because apparently funding the Bureau of Land Management regulations to prevent fracking or reduce fracking and drilling, especially on tribal lands. That is something for me that stood out very stark with this particular mandate in this particular department, is the hyper emphasis on tribal lands. And for those in the BIPOC community who identify as Indigenous First Nation, this is something that you have to really be aware of, because we remember what happened at Standing Rock. Standing Rock was an amazing protest. It was an amazing action, and it was action against drilling in South Dakota. And now, if this becomes the mandate, those protections will be gone.
Well, let me ask you, would this protection also affect the tribal that's in California?
It would impact it. It would impact them, because what this particular mandate is suggesting is that the Bureau of Land Management has too much power. And once again, the Bureau of Land Management, the Department of Interior, and the EPA work very close together. It's kind of like the Department of Education and the Department of Justice. They work very close together. And what this mandate is suggesting is that it's overly relegated, and and the current regulations are harming the market. It's harming the market interest, because people can't drill in certain areas. People can't frack in certain areas. And the idea is that every inch of the United States belongs to the people. And this idea that you have these tribal areas mapped off where there are tons of natural resources. And again, the United States depends very heavily on fossil fuel and petroleum. So one of the things that's happening with Project 2025 in the Department of the Interior is an attempt to defund the Bureau of Land Management, which will have a very stark impact on tribal lands.
Oh, wow. Wow. Thank you for that. Let's talk about the Schedule F that's going to hurt the federal workers. Can you dig into that?
So, regarding the Schedule F employees, so those who have worked in federal government know that there's different levels of classification. Some are classified as 9s, 12s, 14 Schedule Fs. So Schedule F employees are the highest ranked civilian employees in the federal government. Mm-hmm. And what is proposed in Project 2025 and in the conservative conversations is that we need to begin to gut those employees. Literally, they're no longer needed. If you do not work in behest of the conservative, the purported incoming conservative administration, then you are a risk to that administration's goals and this mandate coming into effect. Essentially, what they're attempting to do is to remove potential whistleblowers, potential descendants in the federal government. In the federal government spaces, we're talking Department of Justice, we're talking the Internal Revenue Service, we're talking Department of Education. So these, and Department of the Interior. So we're talking about individuals who are there. They're civilian employees, but the idea is that they want people who are loyal to the conservative mandate.
Okay. And so, now let me ask you a question. So, if you can explain, because there's different levels to the federal government. Like you might have is it called GSL or something?
Yes.
And then you have the Ws. Could you explain that? Will it affect the Ws, the G? How will it affect them also?
Well, according to conservative spaces, it's going to affect everybody. Okay. But because the Schedule F employees are looked at as sort of the highest ranked civilian employees, these are the people who it is presumed by Project 2025 have the most power, have the power of dissent, have the power of sabotage. Let's just be very clear. And do I think that some of that is paranoia? Absolutely. I mean, when you're attempting a coup, the first thing you think is that everyone who doesn't agree with you is out to get you. And there is a tinge of paranoia there that, hey, these people are going to, descend against us and destroy the government. And sometimes it's probably projection too. Like, what would I do in that position, right? But the Schedule F employees, and I did read, it's probably upwards of 50,000 employees. And once again, this is 50,000 employees plus spanning different departments. And if you're taking away people who have been, and because you don't just wake up and become a Schedule F employee. I mean, you've been there for years, for years and years and years. So you're taking senior staff out of some of the most important spaces in our government to replace them with people who are loyal to this mandate. So in addition to possibly having a true oligarch, you know, in addition to having a country that is driven on ideology as opposed to democracy, you will potentially have people who are grossly, I don't want to say incompetent because that seems a little derogatory, but don't really, you know, people who are just unskilled in those very important positions. And once again, we're talking about national security. We're talking about the Internal Revenue Service, the Department of Defense. So that's what the fear is with Schedule F employees. I know the people, some people, the chatter around it is that people will lose their jobs. And it's like, oh, everyone loses their job, get a new one. No, these individuals have they have high classification. These are individuals that, you know, have security clearance. So these are positions that are very close to our national security. And the proposal in this mandate for these Schedule F employees is that they would be dismissed if they do not align with the mandate. And it's almost Orwellian.
Okay.
It's almost like, what is this? It's very dystopic. It's very much, wow, you know. So if I don't pledge allegiance to the conservative mandate, I lose my job. And unfortunately, that's what it appears to be.
Let me ask you, do you think they just woke up one night and thought of this, or this is something that they've been working on for years?
No.
Or months?
No, I don't think I don't think that this was something they woke up and thought about. I mean, there's over 200 different contributors to this. This has been an ongoing effort since the 80s to really return back to those conservative values. I mean, I'm talking about the Reagan administration. They really pushed for more conservative values. The Clinton administration, they really pushed back on some of what they consider the liberalization of things like sex education. If you remember, in the 90s, you started hearing this push about abstinence only into marriage education. And there were block grants given through Social Security Schedule 5 block grants that were going to not educators, not evidence-based organizations, but to religious organizations who put together curriculum to go into public schools and teach about sex education. But it just really was about purity pledges, promise rings, and very gendered education that said, hey, just stay absent until you're married and then everything will be fine. There was no conversation about prevention, no conversation about protection, no conversation about anything. And that's what can happen if you have a mandate or if you have ideology pushed through. So these individuals, especially the Heritage Foundation has been around for years. And when I was just an ingenue lobbyist back in 19 blah, 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 I remember the Heritage Foundation. They were there. So they didn't just pop up, get a C3 and decide to write this. This has been an ongoing ideological initiative for decades. So
let me ask you, since you say you talked about the lobbyists, where did you first start doing your lobbyists?
I started, I would say probably 98 was like when I first started showing a major interest in the political process. I wasn't a registered lobbyist until much later, but I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. I attended school in Ohio. And my first political campaign I worked on, I'm so proud of this, is Fannie Lewis. So Councilwoman Fannie Lewis out of Cleveland, Ohio. She was in the Huff District. If you're from Cleveland, you know who I'm talking about. That was my first political campaign. And this woman was no nonsense. And I, for the first time, saw someone who looked like me, really in the trenches doing this work. I went to the Cleveland City Council and I got to give some testimony on something. What were we talking about? I think it was playgrounds or something. And at the time, I had a young child, and I got to testify for the very first time that we needed the astroturfs on the playgrounds because it's unsafe, and the metal slides actually cause thermal burns to children. And here I am, this young single mom, you know, just advocating, and then we got astroturf on stuff. So I'm not saying it was because of me, but of course, that was my first time giving that kind of testimony before a legislative body, and I just loved it. It was just like, you can influence change. You can, you know, be a voice in the space. And I also started realizing that when I would do more legislative work, there were just more people who looked not like me than looked like me. And, you know, I also have a concurrent background in public health. And so I started doing a lot of public health lobbying and advocacy around HIV/AIDS prevention, adolescent health, maternal mental health. And I kept seeing the same thing. I was the only person of color really in these spaces doing this work to this degree. Okay. And so, yeah, so that was kind of, then here I am, some, you know,
we might have something in common because we both from Ohio. So now I understand.
That's a great place. It's a great place.
Okay, let me ask you this. Let's talk about the Department House of Urban Development. How would that affect especially the minorities?
Well, part of that is an initiative to defund the Section 8 program. And for a lot of people, the Section 8 program is a lifeline to being not unhoused. And what has happened and what is proposed here is that too many people, according to this, are taking advantage of it. They're not working. There are work requirements of Section 8. They want to put more work requirements of Section 8. They want more oversight of the program. And the other thing, too, is that people should be able to get these federal backed loans. Investors should be able to get these federally backed loans, because one of the things that you're starting to see at the state level is that there's a crackdown on home purchasing, like bulk home purchasing. And a lot of states, you know, Illinois is one of those states, you know, they're trying to crack down on that, because what's happening is you're literally gutting the housing market. And unfortunately, a lot of these individuals are getting their capital from these federal backed programs, Sallie Mae, Freddie Mac. And part of what this will do is allow more investors to get that money. Because the idea is that, well, the investors have lower risk when you're giving housing vouchers and subsidies to home ownership to people who haven't demonstrated their degree of financial solvent, their degree of the financial ability to take care of it. It's too much of a risk for the government. And then in doing this, they're attempting to mitigate what happened in 2008 with the housing crisis. But we know the housing crisis had nothing to do with low income home buyers. It had nothing to do with single parents, nothing to do with that at all. This was Wall Street and their speculators that actually crashed the housing market. So that is something that's happening with the Department of Housing, is that they're trying to cut back on Section 8 vouchers and to release the regulations so that investor homeowners can have more access to.
So let me ask you, if they cut back, just say if they cut back on Section 8, I'm looking, you will have a mass of homeless people.
Yes.
a lot of they just say some of the young people can't afford the homes. Could you imagine them taken away from that and the folks that's out on the street?
Yeah, and there's actually evidence to suggest that the unhoused people are now being criminalized. They're now being criminalized. So the idea is, well, if you don't have a house, then that's on you. It sucks to be you. Go figure it out. And and it would be a crisis. It would definitely be a housing crisis. I would definitely see that. Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about the Department of Health and Human Service. That would, do you agree with me that would affect people that's going into the hospitals that don't have insurance, Medicaid, Medicare? Do you agree with me?
I do agree with you. And I also think that removing the ability for Medicaid and Medicare to negotiate costs is going to create a bottleneck because a lot of providers won't take it anymore. And so if you start having providers that are not going to take it anymore, then where are people going to go for health care? And then you're going to start seeing people piled into emergency rooms. You're going to see for, common colds and ear infections simply because they can't get to a doctor. So I do think that attempting to defund or to limit the bargaining power of Medicaid and Medicare is going to have a deleterious impact on the poorest and the most vulnerable, and most of these are going to be children.
So let me ask you, you said it'll affect. Do you see, like right now, I hear people saying that since this insurance thing, they're changing. Some doctors won't take you. Co-pays have went up. They don't give you the medicine and etc. So could you imagine if this going to affect what would happen?
I can not only imagine it, we see evidence of it. You go to major cities and you just speak with young people. They'll tell you, yeah, I'm working 45 hours a week, but I'm sorry about that. I'm working, but I don't have health insurance. So now I'm at the mercy of whoever will see me. Or I had to go into the urgent care and I didn't have any money. And so now I get a bill for $2,000 because I couldn't afford it. Or I need to be able to get to the hospital. I don't have transportation, but I'm very sick. So now I need to call an ambulance, and ambulance costs are $1,000 for a 5-mile ride to a hospital. And the reimbursement is abysmal because many of these ambulance companies don't even take Medicaid or Medicare because they're privately owned. And I think that what will happen with this is that we're going to start seeing people die in the streets. We're going to start seeing people die in their homes. And when you talk about, again, our most vulnerable, which are our children and our elderly, we're going to start seeing massive deaths due to preventable health issues simply because people are choosing to not go into crippling debt just to get health care.
Let me pause for a minute. I'm going to say, today, me and Miss Barnes is on here. We're not trying to scare you, give you the fear, but we're coming with you with the facts to get to understanding that this Project 2025 is serious. It is serious. I hear a lot of young people say, oh, I don't believe in it. This thing is serious. So if you don't get nothing else, get understanding. Thank you. I just want to put that. Let me ask you about Homeland Security, because we hear a lot of talking about the borders.
Right.
And
you mean the border? The border.
The border. The border.
The border.
The border had one border. The border has been open, the crossing. But so let's talk about that.
All right. So
okay, let me ask you this. Let me ask you this. You're in Chicago.
I am in Chicago, yes.
And I got someone on my social media page, and she talked about the border and talk about how Biden opened the border and all these immigrants is in Chicago and they're passing COVID and stuff. You're in Chicago, so I want you to talk about that. They're stealing, they're raping. You in Chicago? I want you to talk about that. You in Chicago?
All right. Yeah, I am. I literally am. I can walk out my front door and I'm in Chicago. So here's what I'm going to say. And in no way am I attempting to kind of do a back and forth with your friend, but here's what I'll tell you. Chicago has always been the scapegoat for everything wrong in the country when there is a conservative conversation involved. So 2 things. Number one, yes, Chicago did see an influx of undocumented immigrants from the southern border around the fall of 2023. And part of that was because the Texas governor decided to just be antagonistic and put people on airplanes and buses and ship them to what he perceived were sanctuary cities. And it was less about what Chicago did or did not do and more about the really almost malevolent behavior of Southern governors to say, hey, if they want to be sanctuary cities, send them all to Chicago. The concern about sending people to a city like Chicago is that we get record cold weather in the wintertime. Our temperatures can go as low as negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit with the wind chill because we're right on the border of Lake Michigan. And if you are coming from a warmer climate without the proper clothing, without proper gloves, and you could die of hypothermia. So while I know people are up in arms because there are undocumented families at the grocery store asking for some fruit snacks for their kids or asking for a couple of dollars, let's talk about the fact that many of these people died just from hypothermia because they had nowhere to go. In addition, the claims of crime, there's no documented evidence that crime has increased in the city of Chicago due to the influx of undocumented families from the southern border. There isn't any. And I'm not talking about what someone saw on Facebook. I'm talking about information from the U.S. Department of Justice. I'm talking about information from the Chicago police, the Cook County Sheriff. I'm talking about people who actually hire people who are a hell of a lot smarter than me and you and understand how to track and report crime. Mm-hmm. There is no influx. What we do see is an influx of unhoused people from the southern border. And most of these individuals are families. So there are families with young children. So these people are not running into grocery stores and breaking into cars and raping, and it's not happening. Sorry, it's not happening. The statistics on violent crime, and ironically, the violent crime statistics in Chicago has dropped. If your listeners care to go and do some real research, they dropped. They've dropped. And so, yes, there is an influx of undocumented families from the southern border, primarily because of some really malevolent, nefarious, and downright petty behavior of a few southern governors. I'm not going to mention any names, but you could figure it out, who would rather spend tens of thousands of dollars to place people on airplanes and buses to send them to Chicago to make a point than to take that money and invest it in housing, invest it in resettlement, there are ways that you can use that money. And they decided to just, hey, let's just put people on airplanes and send them to Chicago in the middle of the winter.
And not only, Chicago. We was up in
Boston, there in
we was up,
Chicago,
we was up in Brooklyn, New York, and
New York,
you would have
Brooklyn.
thought when I was up there, especially in the Manhattan area, that I was across the border in Tijuana. It was that many.
Yeah.
That just was everywhere. But you know, I hear, and you can tell me, I hear people saying we don't want these people here. But these are the same people that build our homes, cut our grass, politicians marry, politicians use as nannies. Do you agree with me?
I agree that we have a challenging relationship in this country with people who we perceive as second-class citizens. We've always had that. First, it was the Irish. And what we did with Irish immigrants is we put them back on a boat and sent them off to war. And if they survived war, then they would get citizenship. Of course, I mean, the history of this country is Americans from Africa. We know how we were treated as second-class citizens and still are. Beyond Jim Crow, beyond the Civil Rights Act, beyond everything. By the way, they want to overdo the Civil Rights Act too. This is just the next population of people.
Okay.
And as sad as it is, because many of us have never really seen it to this degree in our contemporary space. Yeah, this is we have seen iterations of this with different populations who are perceived as a drain on our systems. The other thing that I do want to ask about that is, yes, as far as domestic labor, we have no problem employing undocumented people from our southern borders for domestic labor, for construction, for meat processing, for landscaping, moving, whatever we need. Mm-hmm. But then in the same breath, we complain that they're taking jobs or that they are a drain on our society. And I'm like, come on, is it really,
Can't have it both ways.
Right. No mother from Guatemala is going to come and take my Black job. And I'm okay with that. But you know what? She has every right to do what she needs to do to protect her children. And if she's leaving a situation of civil unrest, if she's leaving a situation where she is unsafe, and this is something we don't talk about. As a mother, what does it take for you to pack up your children and leave and go to another country? What is going on that you have to leave? And I know we say, oh, they do it because they want to come take our jobs. Nobody's traveling 3,000 miles to take your job at Chick-fil-A.
Right.
It's not happening. And no shade to Chick-fil-A workers. I mean, the politics are questionable. The fries are delicious, but that's just absolutely not happening. But it is just a remnant of the bigotry that is woven into the fabric of the United States.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me ask you about Project 2025, the Department of Justice.
Okay.
if that passed, that's going to affect a whole lot of people, and especially my little brothers and cousins, Ray and She them. It's definitely going to affect them. Let's talk about that.
Well, first of all, there's going to be a focus on large scale protests. There's going to be a big focus on organizing, on actions, on protests. Surprisingly, not like the one on January 6th, but the ones like George Floyd and Mike Ferguson and Senator Bland. Because the concern is that they want to give local police forces more power, more militarized power. And that's going to overwhelmingly impact communities like mine. South Chicago is always one that people want to talk about, but yeah, it's going to be, that's one part of it. The next thing is that there is an overwhelming push to restructure the Federal Bureau of Investigation. One can say that at one point, you know, this is the thin blue line party. These are the people who are pro law enforcement, yet you want to totally gut the FBI. And it's like, do you not understand what the FBI is? They're law enforcement. It's like, what are we doing here, right? So the other thing is that, and how it's going to impact, you know, brown brothers and sisters, is that a lot of that power is going to go back to the municipalities. And we know what happens when you have municipalities with law enforcement power and no oversight. It really, you know, laws are written, laws are enforced to the degree that the local culture wants it enforced. So we now have issues where when we do have law enforcement related shootings, now we could contact the Attorney General's office. We could call for an investigation from the Department of Justice. This restructure will not allow us to do that.
Good. And pause right there, because I want to ask you a question. You kind of hit on to that, because I had a question. Just like if I'm just going to say LAPD, if a department shoots somebody, now this Project 2025 come in effect, they don't have to, police don't have to be charged with anything. It's just like we shot them. Is that correct?
So that was my next, that was the next place I wanted to go, because I know that's probably what your listeners are waiting for, is it's called qualified immunity. And so let me first of all explain what qualified immunity is. So qualified immunity asserts that someone is acting in an official capacity of the government. So that can be a law enforcement officer. It could be a member of the Attorney General's office. It could be someone who is appointed by the court as a court officer, or anyone like that. They are offered what's called qualified immunity, which means that if something happens during the course of their job and they are conducting their job that would reach the threshold of a criminal offense, if they were not doing that job, they cannot, they are not that they can't be held accountable, but they have immunity. Mm-hmm. And that's the part that people don't get. Yeah, if you know, hurt someone in the course of your job, even if you have immunity, you're gonna have to prove that you had, that what you did was still, you know, within grounds. Even with qualified immunity, there are parameters in which you can be criminally charged. We just saw that happen in Illinois, which shocks a lot of people because Illinois is considered a liberal state, you know, but not really, but, you know, doesn't shock anyone. What am I saying? It's like, it doesn't shock anyone. What I meant to say is that Illinois, being a liberal state, has a very heavily embedded law enforcement culture, is what I'm trying to say. And I believe this is probably one of the first cases where it was just clear out murder. That was his indictment. But what this immunity would do is it would just take that off the table. It's almost like an international court diplomatic immunity. So if you are, it's called just cogence, and if we're talking international, and what that basically means is that if something is a crime in one place, it's a crime everywhere. But if you are acting in the capacity of a diplomat, then you might be able to evade some extradition. You might be able to evade some consequences to that. And especially if going back to your home country will give you immunity. So that's what this is trying to do. It is, in my opinion, it's really trying to just mimic diplomatic immunity at the international court level, where, yeah, you did something really horrible. And if you were in any other capacity, you would definitely be facing criminal indictment. But now, if you are acting in the capacity of a law enforcement officer, oh, well, sorry about that.
So let me ask you a question. Is this the same thing that is similar to the Supreme Court ruling that they just did with the president?
No, those are two different things. So the Supreme Court ruling of the president basically says that they're not going to pursue charges, because what happens is you can be indicted, and this is where I need, Gerald Griggs to really speak the law to you. But, you could be indicted, you could be charged, you could be indicted. But if no one decides to kind of go through with the prosecution process, then there's no prosecution.
Okay.
I think what happened with the Supreme Court was a heavily politicized. Definitely Justice Thomas has some, there's a great deal of nepotism and malfeasance in there. And that's a whole other conversation.
Okay. Let me ask you a question. Explain this, and maybe you can clear this up. Maybe I'm thinking, what about, I just say ladies or girls that get raped by their father, their relative, or just a stranger under Project 2025? Could they get rid of that baby, or are they going to have to keep that baby?
Okay, let's dive in. So Project 2025 has a 0 clause on abortion. So we're talking about abortions, right? With the following exceptions. If it is an ectopic pregnancy, or if continuing the pregnancy has a direct consequence on the mother's immediate life, meaning you are in the hospital and your blood pressure is through the roof because you have preeclampsia, and the only way to remedy this is to terminate the pregnancy, it may allow for that. But what it also does is it has a clause that says, even in those circumstances, the medical staff has to exhaust every potential medical intervention prior to termination. But to answer your direct question, the answer is no. The answer is no. There would be no clause for rape or incest. There would be no clause based on age. And we know that menstrual age is correlated to fertility. And there are, cis girls who can begin menstruating as young as 8 years old. And when we're talking about forced sex, forced sex is called rape. We're talking about, raping children or sexually assaulting children, and it leads to pregnancy. The position of Project 2025 is that the pregnancy came about due to an unfortunate circumstance. And because of the unfortunate circumstances, it does not meet the threshold to terminate a potential human life. Okay. So, and I know it's really easy to get very inflammatory about these conversations. And as you've known me for a little bit and you've watched me, I tend to really just stick to the facts on this kind of stuff, because I think that it's easy to get insulted by it. It's easy to become infuriated by it. And that's what they want, but the bottom line is it's very important to recognize that this is the conservative mandate. Also, most pregnancies do not occur due to sexual assault. And most pregnancies do not occur among 8-year-olds. And I think if we're going to have a conversation, we have to also make sure that we are not going to the most extreme cases, because it does marginalize what's really happening. What's really happening is sometimes contraception fails. Sometimes life happens. Sometimes you do have a health issue that is contraindicated to pregnancy. Sometimes you might have 5 children and you might be in a domestic violence situation, and you can't use birth control, and you can't use condoms, and you can't prevent pregnancy, because we also know that pregnancy is a weapon of abusers to keep you locked in having children. So those are conversations that are equally important. What is the role of elective termination or abortion in the continuum of care of victims who are attempting to escape domestic violence situations? What is the role of abortion in the continuum of care of someone who is trying to escape a sex trafficking situation. So those are the questions that we really need to be kind of grappling with when we talk about these mandates, because those are more likely to occur. And but yeah, to answer your original question, yes, it would. There is no clause for rape or incest.
Okay, let's talk about the overtime. People working over 40 hours and they don't want to pay you the overtime in Project 2025. They're trying to strip away that. Could you hit a little bit on that?
On the Department of Labor, yeah, one of the things that they're trying to do is to really so the 40-hour work week and also the overtime that comes from labor unions. And one of the things that Project 2025 is very clear about is that they are anti-labor union. They're anti-labor union because what they assume is that labor unions have way too much power and labor unions have the potential to manipulate the market.
Could you stop for a minute on that? You say they don't like the unions.
That's correct.
Could you help me understand, if they don't like the unions, why would the union president over the federal unions endorse the president? That's a conversation that I'm gonna have to talk about later. So that let me know somebody don't care about the people. Somebody.
So overwhelmingly, unions were not embraced by conservatives because what it does is it is an antithesis of the free market. The free market states that employment is at will. Employment should be at the behest of the employer. Mm-hmm. If I want you to come to work at 3 a.m. and leave at 3 a.m., do it. If you can't do it, I'll fire you and get someone else who will. So it's a very labor-based, like the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. It's a very labor-based relationship with work.
So Georgia is an at will. They can fire you on the drop of a dime. Okay, keep on going. Thanks.
Yes. And so overwhelmingly, but here's the thing is that a lot of professions that have labor unions, especially skilled trades like carpentry, plumbing, electrician, they also tend to attract the population that leans heavily conservative. So it's a very interesting marriage of ideology versus politics. So the labor union prototype is a middle-aged conservative white man who has a family and is very, very aligned with family values. And now we're also seeing that across the board, basically with races. And those parts of the conservative agenda they like. However, the other part of that is the collective bargaining part of that, which labor unions, that is their bread and butter, is collective bargaining. Collective bargaining is literally a thorn in the side of the free market. Okay. It's a thorn in the side of the free market. And so what they'll do is they'll let people know, oh my God, they're just going to take money out of your pocket, out of your paycheck that could be gone for something else. And they just want to just, take your money. The other thing too is the declassification of discrimination and what are protected classes. We are seeing a big overlap between the Department of Labor and protected classes and things like critical race theory, where the idea of the discrimination based on race should be essentially just removed from the Department of Labor, because what it does is it sets up this idea that people who are not considered a racial minority have no protection, and all the protections go to the minorities who are always being abused by the big bad people. And it's like, yes, that's why it was put in place in the first place. But that's the other thing that's happened with the Department of Labor, is that they're attempting to kind of chip away at those protected classes, which is going to come in very handy, especially when you become pregnant or you identify as non-binary or transgender. The idea that, you can't, there's no protected classes with the Department of Labor, which is absolutely, absolutely, absolutely.
Let me ask you. Let's
Absolutely.
talk about, let's hit bases with the Social Security about people that's paying in Social Security might not get it and how they want to do away with that. Let's talk about that.
Well, basically, Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, those are all entitlement programs. And entitlement programs are paid into, for the most part, by workers and also by federal allocation. So a percentage of your federal taxes are going to go to these programs. And also, especially with things like Social Security, a percentage of your earned income wages are going to go to Social Security. And what happens is, under Project 2025, it is assumed that should be handled by the free market. Basically, people should have the ability to invest in Roth IRAs and different investment vehicles, and it should be invested through the market. And basically, whatever you get at the end of it, that's your retirement. And the idea is that instead of this kind of crude, allocation into a system, and then at the end of the system, at the end of your working tenure, you get this money. They feel like that's actually not the most cost-effective way to ensure that there's money for people as they reach old age. Now, the concern with that is you have a lot of people who have spent 20 years of their lives as a 1099 contractor, as a gig worker, or people who need other types of Social Security programs like Social Security disability, Social Security survivor benefits. So I think by defunding those programs, the thought of Project 2025 and the conservative mandate is like, it will encourage people to be more aware of the free market. And essentially, if you don't invest in the free market, then you can't expect to get anything out of it at the end. And it's once again, it's ideology marrying politics and probably having an affair with real life.
Okay. Look, we at 153, and I want to hit this project. Project 2025 is 922 pages.
It's pretty robust, yes.
And you cannot get through that whole 922 pages in an hour.
Okay.
But what I want to do, I want to shift gears now.
Okay.
Let's talk about this 2024 election.
Oh.
Do you think that Vice President Harris made a good choice on that vice president pick?
I do. I think that, there were some other really solid people that were being thrown around. Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan was one. Pete Buttigieg was another one. But I think that what I like about Tim Walz is that he for one, he has a track record. He didn't just pop out of thin air. He does have a track record. He seems likable. He seems relatable. But, at this point, the DNC is in a week. Down the street, actually, from where I am. It's down the street. And that's when that nominee will be set in stone. That nomination will be set in stone. I think that it's a good pick. I don't really have any issues with him, which lets me know that I have to really just see. Because if I'm looking, I'm sure that the other side is looking too. But from what I know, and I'm familiar with his work as an educator, I think that it is time for sensibility to come back into the executive branch. It has just become so ideological. It has become basically a circular firing squad and a pissing match. And it's really it's time for us to go back to basics of civility, maturity, and trying to govern this country. Because right now we are in a crisis.
Right. Now you're a lobbyist and you've been around under a lot of elected officials.
Yes.
I'm quite sure you was under the Gold Dome down here in Georgia.
Yes. I was, yes, for
Do
5
you
years.
think, and this is just your opinion, do you think that Vice President Harris would make a great president for us right now?
I think that giving her background, given the fact that the short answer is yes, I think that she'll be fine. But I think that it's a deeper question than simply a yes. It's more because I don't identify as any party. I identify as a progressive. So I think that she has a track record that can be seen as problematic, especially her work in California. But I also believe that she has attempted to mitigate that a great deal. She has demonstrated her ability to work across the aisle, and she's also demonstrated her ability to work with civilian groups, with grassroots organizers. And so because of that, I think she's got to be fine.
Yes, great. So we got 3 minutes. I'm going to ask this last question.
Okay.
Given that the election is less than 100 days out now, what do we need to do to make sure not only everybody's on board, but especially the Black men and just men in general? What do we need to do to get, and the young folks, to get her across the finish line?
Okay. So I want to be super clear that I'm not in any way campaigning for any candidate.
Yeah, I know. I'm just asking you the question.
No, but what I would say is it's really about civic engagement. It's really about making sure that people are registered to vote. If you do not know if you're registered to vote, most states, well, all states, all 50 states, voter registration is housed in the Secretary of State's office. So if you're in Alaska to Wyoming, go to that state Secretary of State's office, and there should be a link about voter registration. Go and put in your information. And first of all, make sure you're registered to vote. Second of all, know where you're supposed to vote and what times you're supposed to vote. Because very often, there's some nefarious players who will put up signs that are like, oh, voting is canceled. You got to vote on Wednesday. No, voting is on Tuesday. Okay. Unless you're early voting. Also, learn about your candidates. It's more than just the top of the ticket. You have an entire slate of candidates, from judges to county commissioners to the watershed commissioner, which is important because Atlanta just had a huge water outage. Well, yeah, you need to know who your watershed commissioner is. School board elections are going to be important this cycle, because one of the things that's being attacked through Project 2025 is critical race theory. That is coming directly through the Department of Education. So you need to know who your local school districts are and vote for them. But I think in terms of getting someone over the line, I think it really comes down to recognizing that if this aligns with your politics, if this Project 2025 is absolutely frightening to you, if it is something that you're like, oh my God, this is so dystopian, it can't happen, let me tell you, it can. And we've seen these type of mandates come into play before, most commonly Jim Crow. Jim Crow was not federal law, it was state law. And it was able to get the reach it got because several states signed on to it. So to get people over the finish line, to ensure that Project 2025 does not see the light of day, we got to vote. We got to get out there. We got to learn where our polling places are. We got to become educated, not just on the top of the ticket, but on the entire slate. Because trust me, many of you are standing before judges in criminal court and civil court, and you are being given verdicts and judgments that you absolutely hate, but you haven't voted for a judge in 20 years.
Absolutely.
So that's kind of where I want to leave it.
Yep, yep.
Register and vote.
Give us your website. Put your website in your closing. Tell us your website and stuff and how to follow you. Put it in, also put it in the chat for me.
Okay. Well, the best way to follow me, I would say, is on social media. It's just Kenyette Tisha Barnes on all social media. You can find me. I believe most of my accounts are verified. So if you see someone that's not verified and you think it's me, send me a DM and I can verify it for you. But that's probably the best way to find it.
Okay. Thank you so much for taking your time out. I know you got some going on.
Yeah.
There
There's always stuff going on.
In Chicago, but thank you so much. We'll be reaching out to you later. Matter of fact, after the election is over, whoever get in office, we're gonna come back. And when you come back, I want you to get real down into it. I don't want you to hold none back. And if we can't do it on Talk Take a Stand, then we're gonna do it through my organization. But we got to get down, and we can't sugarcoat this thing because this thing is real. Project 2025 is real. This election is real. Our democracy is on the line.
Oh, absolutely.
Everything is on the line. And if you don't believe it's on the line, just watch the television. She don't have to say this because she a lobbyist. I can say this. If you do not vote in this election, make sure you register to vote. You better, I hope you vote. I'm going to tell you like Big Mama and the grandmama say, you better go vote. If not, shame on you. I hear people saying that they're not going to vote for this black woman and all this crazy stuff. I think you're crazy. And I'm going to do a show Sunday night on that. But again, thank you so much for being here. We look forward to hearing from you again. You keep on doing what you're doing, and make sure you go to that convention and you tear that house down.
That's the plan. That is the plan. That is the plan. Yeah. And definitely, I know we didn't get a chance to get to it about, the concerns around Black men and Kamala Harris, and that's a deeper dive. But that's another show.
Yep. We gonna talk about it. But thank you so much for coming on, and we look forward to working with you in the future. And see, I didn't even spill the secret. Thank you so much.
You take care, love. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.